Welcome to Honey Peach. In this video, boring history for sleep from ships to Congress, the epic of American independence, we will tell you about the most important events that led to American independence. Perfect for those who are looking for soothing sleep stories. Listen to calm stories about ships, battles, and political decisions that changed the course of history. Immerse yourself in a world where a boring story becomes fascinating and relaxing. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so that you don't miss new videos that will help you fall asleep. American history. Ancient cultures before 1492. American history is a fascinating and multi-layered process spanning thousands of years, full of significant events and cultural changes. Let us start with ancient times, when the first civilizations were born in the vast expanses of the modern United States. The first settlers, the first people crossing the Bering Bridge from Asia, probably arrived in the territory of the future United States about 1500 years ago. These primitive groups, hunters and gatherers, gradually settled throughout the continent, adapting to diverse climatic conditions and natural resources. Over time, they developed unique cultures and lifestyles based on hunting, fishing, and gathering. Among them, such tribes as the Iroquois, Navajo, and Pueblo stand out. The Iroquois, known for their political system and alliances, created a powerful confederate state that played an important role in regional politics. The Navajo, with their rich culture and traditions, became masters in textile production and jewelry making, while the Pueblos, living in clay houses, developed unique architectural styles and agriculture based on irrigation. Classical civilizations. By 1000 AD, there were complex societies in the modern United States that left a significant legacy. One of the most famous was the Mississippi culture, which flourished along rivers such as the Mississippi and Ohio. These societies built majestic mounds that served as both ritual and political centers. The city of Cahokia, located near modern-day St. Louis, became the largest city in North America at that time, with a population of 20 people. The Mississippian culture was known for its agriculture, especially the cultivation of corn, which became the basis of their diet. These societies also developed trade, exchanging goods and ideas with neighboring cultures, which promoted cultural diversity and development. Thus, the ancient cultures of America became the basis for future civilizations, leaving a deep mark on the history of the continent. Their legacy lives on in modern indigenous traditions and culture, as well as in archaeological finds that help us better understand their way of life and achievements. The era of colonization, 149 to 1607. The era of colonization is an important and turning point in American history, which began with the opening of the continent to Europeans and led to significant changes in culture, economy, and politics in both the Old and New Worlds. This period covers events from 1492, when Christopher Columbus first set foot on American soil, to 1607, when the first English colony was founded in Jamestown. 1492. The discovery of America. The year 1492 became a landmark moment in world history when Christopher Columbus, the Italian navigator, made his first voyage under the Spanish flag. His goal was to find a new sea route to India, but instead he discovered new lands that later became known as America. This discovery marked the beginning of the era of colonization, when European powers began to actively explore, conquer, and colonize new territories. Columbus made for expeditions, but it was his first voyage that became the catalyst for mass interest in the New World. Soon after his return to Europe, a wave of exploration began, when other navigators such as Amerigo Vespucci and Vasco Nunes de Balboa also began to discover new lands and expand knowledge about the continent. Spanish colonization. During the 16th century, Spain became one of the leading colonial powers, actively colonizing parts of Central and South America, as well as the southwestern territories of the modern United States. Spanish conquistadors such as Hernando Cortés and Francisco Pizarro conquered the powerful Aztec and Inca empires, resulting in vast wealth and resources flowing into Spain. Spanish colonization also covered the territories that are today known as Florida and California. In 1513, Juan Ponce de Leon became the first European to explore Florida, and in 1542, Juan Rodriguez Cabrillo explored the coast of California. The Spaniards established missions and military outposts, which became the basis for future cities and cultural exchange. French and English colonization. Since the beginning of the 17th century, the colonization of America has acquired a new scale. In 1607, the British established their first permanent colony in Jamestown, Virginia. This colony became an important center for English settlers who sought new opportunities and freedom from religious persecution. Jamestown also became the site of the first experiments in tobacco cultivation, which soon became a key export commodity. At the same time, the French began to explore and colonize the territories around the Mississippi River. Under the leadership of researchers such as Samuel de Champlain, the French founded cities such as Quebec and Montreal and actively developed trade with indigenous peoples. French colonization focused on the fur trade and building alliances with local tribes, which distinguished it from the more aggressive Spanish colonization. The era of colonization 1449 to 1607 became the basis for the formation of the future United States and led to significant changes in the lives of indigenous peoples, European settlers, and the global economy. These events not only changed the landscape of America, but also laid the foundations for further conflicts, cultural exchanges, and social development that would develop in the centuries to come. The colonial period 1607-1776. The colonial period in American history, spanning the years from 1607 to 1776, was a time of intense growth, economic change, and profound social transformation. This is the time when the English colonies on the East Coast began to actively develop, facing challenges, both internal and external. Colony growth. Since the founding of Jamestown in 1607, the English colonies began to grow and develop rapidly. During the 17th century, many colonies emerged on the East Coast, each with its own unique characteristics and goals. Massachusetts, founded by Puritans, became a center of religious and cultural development, with an emphasis on education and public morality. Maryland, created as a haven for Catholics, has become an example of religious tolerance. And Pennsylvania, founded by William Penn, is known for its principles of freedom of conscience and its multi-ethnic population. These colonies became important centers of trade and culture, where various crafts, agriculture, and maritime trade developed. The emergence of new cities such as Boston and Philadelphia contributed to the growth of economic ties both within the colonies and with Europe. The colonists began to actively use natural resources such as forests, fish, and farmland, which contributed to their prosperity. Conflicts with indigenous peoples, however, colonization was not without conflict. Clashes with indigenous peoples have become an integral part of the colonial experience. The Puritans, seeking to expand their territories, came into conflict with the Packwood tribe in 1637, which led to violent clashes and significant losses on both sides. This conflict was one of the first examples of violence caused by colonization. In 1675-1676, the War of King Philip broke out, named after the leader of the Waropono tribe, who united several tribes against the English colonists. This conflict became one of the most devastating in New England and led to significant losses among the indigenous peoples, as well as to a change in the balance of power in the region. Conflicts with local tribes highlighted the complex relationship between the colonists and the indigenous peoples, who sought to protect their lands and culture. Economic changes in the 18th century, the colonies began to develop an agriculture-based economy, especially in the southern colonies such as Virginia and the Carolinas. These areas became the centers of plantation agriculture, where crops such as tobacco, rice, and indigo were grown. Slave labor was actively used to ensure the operation of the plantations, which became the basis for the economic model of the southern colonies. Slavery became not only a social, but also an economic issue that would later play a key role in the history of the United States. Economic changes also led to the emergence of new classes, such as wealthy planters, who began to accumulate significant influence and power in the colonies. At the same time, a more diverse economy developed in the northern colonies, where agriculture, handicrafts, and maritime trade were combined. The colonial period 1607-1776 was a time of significant change and conflict that shaped America's future. The growth of colonies, clashes with indigenous peoples, and economic transformations created a complex picture in which the foundations for future independence were being formed. This period laid the foundation for further events that would lead to the American Revolution and the creation of a new state. The American Revolution 1775-1783. The American Revolution, which spanned the period from 1775 to 1783, was a decisive moment in the history of the United States when the colonies stood up for their rights and freedoms against British rule. This period was imbued with the spirit of struggle, the desire for independence, and the desire to create a new society based on the principles of freedom and equality. The beginning of the revolution, the conflict between the colonies and Great Britain escalated throughout the 1760s and 1770s. when the British government introduced a number of taxes and laws that caused discontent among the colonists. The main reason for the protest was the lack of representation of the colonies in the British Parliament, which became the basis for the slogan "No taxation without representation." The Boston Tea Party in 1773 became a symbol of resistance. In protest against the Tea Tax Act, a group of colonists disguised as Indians committed an audacious act of vandalism by dumping tea cases into the waters of Boston Harbor. This event not only drew attention to the problems of the colonies, but also became a spark that ignited the flames of revolution. The British government responded by imposing harsh measures, which only increased discontent among the colonists. Declaration of Independence 1776. The culmination of the growing tension was the adoption of the Declaration of Independence on July 4, 1776 by the Second Continental Congress. This document, written by Thomas Jefferson, became the founding text that proclaimed the independence of the colonies from Great Britain. The Declaration affirmed not only the right to self-determination, but also basic principles such as equality, freedom, and the right to happiness. The words "we consider these truths to be self-evident, that all people are created equal" became a symbol of the struggle for human rights and inspired future generations. The adoption of the Declaration was not only a political act, but also a powerful manifesto uniting the colonists in their quest for independence. This event marked the beginning of a new era in which the colonies became not only subjects of the British Empire, but also sovereign states ready to defend their rights. The War of Independence, the conflict, which began with small skirmishes such as the Battle of Lexington and Concord in 1775, escalated into a full-scale War of Independence. For the next 8 years, the colonies fought a well-trained and equipped British army. The war was full of both successes and failures for both sides. The key moments were the Battle of Saratov in 1777, which marked a turning point, and the Siege of Yorktown in 1781, when British forces surrendered to American and French forces. France, realizing that the independence of the colonies could be useful for its own interests, entered the war on the side of the Americans, providing them with the necessary military and financial support. This collaboration was a crucial factor in the success of the colonists. The Paris Peace Treaty. The conflict ended with the signing of the Paris Peace Treaty in 1783, which officially recognized the independence of the United States. This treaty was an important step in history, consolidating the rights of the American colonies and putting an end to British rule on the East Coast. The American Revolution not only liberated the colonies from British control, but also laid the foundations for the formation of a new state based on the principles of democracy and human rights. This period became a symbol of the struggle for freedom and inspired other nations to take similar actions around the world. The American Revolution 1775-1783 was an important stage in the history of not only the United States, but the entire world. It demonstrated the power of unity and the desire for freedom, and also led to the creation of a new state, which became an example for many countries striving for independence and self-government. Formation of the state 1783-1815. The period from 1783 to 1815 was a crucial stage in the formation of the United States as an independent state. At that time, the foundations of the new government were laid, key documents defining the rights of citizens were developed, and national identity was strengthened through military conflicts. This period can be described as a time of intense change, when a young nation was looking for its place in the world. The U.S. Constitution 1787. After the end of the War of Independence, the American colonies faced the need to create an effective management system. The U.S. Constitution, adopted in 1787, became the most important document that defined the structure of the federal government and its powers. The Constitution was drafted at the Philadelphia Convention, where delegates from various states gathered to discuss issues related to governance and governance. She established a system of checks and balances, dividing power into three branches: executive, legislative, and judicial. This structure was designed to prevent abuse of power and ensure a balance of interests between different groups. The Constitution also provided for a mechanism for changing it, which made it possible to adapt it to the changing conditions and needs of society. This document has become the cornerstone of American democracy, consolidating the principles of freedom and equality. Bill of Rights 1791 and 1791, the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, known as the Bill of Rights, were adopted. These amendments guaranteed the basic rights and freedoms of citizens, including freedom of speech, freedom of religion, the right to assembly, and the right to protection. The Bill of Rights became an important addition to the Constitution, which calmed the fears of many citizens that the new federal government could threaten their rights. It has become a symbol of the protection of individual freedoms and human rights in the United States, and its principles continue to influence American law today. The War of 1812, the War of 1812, which broke out between the United States and Great Britain, was another important event in the history of the formation of the American state. The conflict arose for a number of reasons, including trade restrictions, the seizure of American ships, and British support for indigenous peoples opposed to U.S. expansion. Although the war was not an unequivocal victory for both sides, it played a key role in strengthening the national identity of the new nation. The United States, despite the difficulties, has been able to demonstrate its ability to defend its independence and sovereignty. The Battle of New Orleans, which took place in 1815, became a symbol of American patriotism and unity. As a result of the war, the United States gained recognition as an independent state and also strengthened its position in the international arena. This conflict also contributed to the development of national identity, which was an important step in shaping American identity. The period of the formation of the state 1783-1815 became fundamental for the United States when key principles and institutions were laid down that determined their future. The Constitution and the Bill of Rights became important documents protecting the rights of citizens, and the War of 1812 strengthened independence and national identity. These events marked the beginning of a long journey that led to the establishment of the United States as one of the world's leading powers. Territorial expansion and the Civil War 1815-1865. The period from 1815 to 1865 was a time of active expansion and deep internal conflicts for the United States. The desire to expand its borders and strengthen the country as economic power has led to significant changes in its political and social structure. However, this desire for growth concealed serious conflicts, including with indigenous peoples and within the nation itself. Western expansion. Since the beginning of the 19th century, the United States began to actively move west, seeking to develop new territories, which became known as the mission or destination. This desire for expansion was supported by the ideology that Americans believed they had a divine right to expand their borders from the Atlantic to the Pacific Ocean. However, this process has not been without conflicts. Expansion into Western lands led to the forcible displacement of the indigenous peoples who lived in these territories. The policy of eradicating indigenous peoples, including events such as the Trail of Tears, has become a sad page in the history of the United States. One of the key moments in this expansion was the annexation of Texas in 1845. Texas, formerly owned by Mexico, became the object of desire for many American settlers, which led to conflict with the Mexican government. As a result, the Mexican War 1846-1848 ended with the signing of the Treaty of Guadalajara, under which the United States gained vast territories, including California and New Mexico. This expansion, although it brought new lands, also exacerbated existing internal contradictions, especially on issues of slavery and states' rights. Civil war. By the middle of the 19th century, tensions between the North and the South had reached a critical point. The main causes of the conflict were issues of slavery, economic interests, and states' rights. The North, with its industrial economy, opposed the expansion of slavery into new territories, while the South, dependent on agriculture and slave labor, sought to preserve and expand its rights. The Civil War, which began in 1861, became one of the bloodiest conflicts in American history. The war took place against the background of profound social and political changes, and its outcome determined the future of the nation. After 4 years of fierce fighting, the war ended in 1865 with the victory of the North. This led to the abolition of slavery in the United States, which was enshrined in the 13th Amendment to the Constitution. The Civil War not only freed millions of people, but also initiated Reconstruction processes that would rebuild the southern states and integrate freed slaves into society. The period of territorial expansion in the Civil War 1815-1865 marked a turning point in the history of the United States. The expansion to the west led to significant changes in the geopolitical map of the country, but also exacerbated internal conflicts, which resulted in a civil war. This period became the basis for the formation of modern American society, where issues of human rights and equality began to occupy a central place. Reconstruction and Industrialization 1865-1900. After the end of the Civil War in 1865, the United States entered a new era known as the Reconstruction era. This period was a time of complex transformations and attempts to restore the unity of the country. as well as ensure the rights and freedoms of millions of liberated African Americans. The era of Reconstruction began with the adoption of a number of constitutional amendments aimed at protecting the rights of African Americans. The 13th Amendment, already mentioned, officially freed slaves, while the 14th and 15th Amendments guaranteed civil rights and the right to vote. However, in practice, these rights were often ignored, especially in the southern states, where various forms of racial discrimination arose. The southern states faced huge economic and social challenges. The infrastructure was destroyed, and the economy needed to be rebuilt. During this period, there was much debate about how to integrate the southern states back into the Union and how to ensure equal rights for all citizens. The struggle for the rights of African Americans has become an important part of Reconstruction. The creation of schools, churches, and other community organizations helped African Americans gain strength and organize to defend their rights. However, with the end of Reconstruction in 1877, when federal troops left the South, a new era of racial segregation and discrimination began, known as the Jim Crow era. Industrialization. By the end of the 19th century, the United States experienced rapid industrialization, which radically changed the economic landscape of the country. The country became one of the world's leading industrial powers, and this process was accompanied by the emergence of large corporations and the growth of the working class. Industrialization was driven by a number of factors, including the abundance of natural resources such as coal and iron ore, as well as technological innovations. Railways have become a key element connecting different regions of the country and facilitating trade and migration. The working class, consisting of both immigrants and locals, grew rapidly. Many people were looking for jobs in factories and industrial enterprises, which led to urbanization and urban growth. However, working conditions were often terrible. Long working hours, low salaries, and dangerous working conditions became the norm. In response to these conditions, labor movements and trade unions began to form, which fought for workers' rights. These movements have become an important part of American history, raising questions about justice, equality, and human rights. The period of Reconstruction and Industrialization 1865-1900 was a time of significant change for the United States. The Reconstruction era sought to restore the unity of the country and ensure the rights of all citizens, but faced many obstacles. Industrialization, in turn, led to economic growth, but also to social conflicts that left a deep mark on American society. 20th century. Wars and Changes 1900-000. World War I 1914-1918. The First World War, which swept the world from 1914 to 1918, became one of the most devastating conflicts in human history. While many countries were plunging into chaos and destruction, the United States, being at the initial stage of the conflict, remained neutral. However, The situation changed in 1917, when the United States decided to enter the war, which became a landmark moment not only for the country, but for the whole world. The reasons that prompted the United States to enter the conflict were diverse. One of the key reasons was the impact of the German submarine war on American trade interests in the Atlantic. Attacks on merchant ships such as the Lusitania have resulted in civilian deaths and caused public discontent. In addition to this, economic ties with allies such as Britain and France became another important reason to participate in the war. When the United States entered the war, it had a powerful impact on its outcome. American troops, known as the Gentlemen, quickly arrived in Europe and brought fresh forces to the Allied ranks. This not only boosted the morale of the Allied forces, but also significantly changed the balance of power at the front. The economic impact of the war on the United States was tangible. In wartime conditions, the country's economy experienced a real heyday. The industry was repurposed for the needs of the army, which led to increased production and job creation. Farmers who produced food for the front also saw an increase in demand for their products. This time was an era of economic recovery, contributing to the development of new technologies and production methods. However, despite the economic success, the war also led to social changes. Women replacing men in the workplace began to engage in work that was previously considered male. This became the basis for future changes in the role of women in society. In addition, African Americans began to migrate from southern states to northern cities in search of better economic opportunities, which contributed to the beginning of the Great Migration. After the end of the war in 1918, the United States returned to civilian life, but the effects of the conflict were felt for a long time. The return to a peaceful economy proved difficult, and a periodic wave of economic crises began in the country. Nevertheless, the United States' participation in World War I consolidated its status as a world power and laid the foundations for active participation in international affairs in the future. Thus, the First World War became not only an important military conflict, but also a catalyst for changes in the U.S. economy and society, which determined the further development of the country in the 20th century. Boring history for sleep. The Great Depression 1929. In the history of the United States, the Great Depression, which began in 1929, occupies a special place as one of the most devastating economic crises. This period was a time of profound changes that affected every area of American life and left an indelible mark on the nation as consciousness. Causes of the crisis. The causes of the Great Depression were diverse and complex. In the late 1920s, the U.S. economy was at its peak, and many people invested in the stock market hoping for quick profits. However, this boom was based on speculation and unstable financial fundamentals. On October 24, 1929, known as Black Thursday, the stock market crashed, marking the beginning of a massive economic collapse. The stock market crash caused millions of Americans to lose their savings and triggered a chain reaction that affected banks, businesses, and families. By 1933, the unemployment rate had reached 25, which meant that 1 in 4 Americans was unemployed. Poverty and misery swept the country, and many people lost their homes, leading to the formation of our temporary camps for the homeless, where people lived in tents and old cars. Social changes. The Great Depression had a profound impact on the social fabric of the United States. People who were previously considered successful turned out to be on the verge of survival. Many families have been forced to rely on charity, and aid programs have become vital for millions. At the same time, the crisis has become a catalyst for the intensification of the movement for workers' rights and the creation of trade unions. Among the changes caused by depression, changes in the role of women in society should also be noted. During the economic crisis, many women began to work to support their families, which contributed to a change in traditional gender roles. Women became more active participants in the workforce, which later became the basis for the struggle for equal rights. New economic policy in response to the crisis. President Franklin D. Roosevelt initiated the New Deal program, aimed at restoring the economy and helping those affected. This program included job creation, support for farmers, and financial system reform. Roosevelt became a symbol of hope for many Americans, and his actions helped restore trust in the government. New Deal programs included initiatives such as the creation of the Civilian Environmental Protection Corps (CCC), which provided jobs for young people, and the Public Works Administration (UPA), which funded infrastructure construction. These measures not only helped to improve the economic situation, but also led to the creation of many public facilities such as bridges, roads, and schools. The Great Depression left an indelible mark on American history, changing not only the economy, but also social relations. This period has taught the country important lessons about financial responsibility and the need for social support. In the end, despite the suffering and difficulties, the crisis became a catalyst for changes that led to a stronger and more sustainable economy in the future. Boring history for sleep. World War E19391945. The Second World War, which broke out in 1939, became one of the most significant and destructive conflicts in the history of mankind. The United States, which entered the war in 1941, not only played a key role in defeating the Axis, but also became one of the main world powers after the war, forming a new international society and creating organizations such as the United Nations. On background of the war, the Second World War was the result of many factors, including the effects of the First World War, the economic difficulties that arose as a result of the Great Depression, and the aggressive actions of totalitarian regimes in Europe and Asia. Nazi Germany under the leadership of Adolf Hitler, Fascist Italy under the leadership of Benito Mussolini, and the Japanese Empire began to expand their territories, which caused international tension. In 1939, Germany invaded Poland, which was the trigger for the outbreak of war. Britain and France declared war on Germany, and the conflict quickly spread around the world. The entry of the United States into the war. At first, the United States adhered to a policy of neutrality, but every year the situation became more tense. In 1941, after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, the United States was forced to enter the war. This attack, which killed more than 200 American military personnel and civilians, marked a turning point for the country. After the declaration of war on Japan, Germany and Italy declared war on the United States, and America entered the conflict onto fronts in Europe and in the Pacific Ocean. The war became not only a military but also an economic challenge for the country, requiring the mobilization of resources and labor. Economic and military efforts during the war. The U.S. economy underwent significant changes. The industry has been repurposed for the production of military equipment, weapons, and other necessary materials. Women who previously occupied traditional roles of housewives began working in industries, which was an important step towards changing gender roles in society. The slogan, "We can do it," it became a symbol of this era, embodying the strength and determination of women who replaced men who went to the front. The United States was also actively involved in building strategic alliances with other countries such as Britain and the Soviet Union. These alliances became the basis for the successful conduct of military operations in various theaters of war. Key battles of the Second World War. The Second World War was full of significant battles, each of which had an impact on the course of the conflict. Among them, a special place is occupied by battles in which American troops actively participated. These battles were not only a test for military strategy, but also a test of the spirit and determination of the soldiers. Let us take a closer look at some of the most key battles, including Operation Overlord, the Battle of Midway, and the Battle of Guadalcanal. Operation Overlord and the Normandy Landings. Operation Overlord, which began on June 6, 1944, went down in history as one of the largest and most complex military operations. It was a decisive event that opened a second front in Europe and became a turning point in the struggle against Nazi Germany. Planning for the operation began back in 1943, and the Allied forces, consisting of American, British, and Canadian troops, spent months preparing. The Normandy landings, also known as D-Day, were the result of careful coordination and the use of cutting-edge technology such as amphibious assault ships and specialized tanks. On D-Day, more than 156 Zero soldiers crossed the English Channel and landed on 5 beaches: Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juneau, and Sword. Despite the strong resistance of the German troops and severe weather conditions, the Allied forces were able to capture the beaches and begin advancing deep into France. The Battle of Normandy lasted until the end of August 1944 and resulted in significant losses on both sides. But eventually the Allies were able to liberate Paris and establish control over most of France. Operation Overlord demonstrated not only tactical skill, but also the determination of the American and Allied forces, becoming a symbol of hope for the occupied countries. The Battle of Midway. The Battle of Midway, which took place from June 47, 1942, became one of the most significant battles in the Pacific Ocean. This battle took place just 6 months after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor and marked a turning point in the war against Japan. The Japanese command planned to capture Midway Atoll in order to expand its position in the Pacific Ocean. However, American intelligence was able to intercept the Japanese codes and learn about the enemy's plans in advance. This allowed the United States to prepare its forces and organize its defense. Aircraft carriers, submarines, and aircraft from both sides participated in the battle. The American forces, having numerical superiority in aviation, were able to deliver a crushing blow to the Japanese aircraft carriers, destroying 4 of them and significantly weakening the Japanese fleet. The Battle of Midway was not only a military victory, but also an important moral victory for the United States, demonstrating that the Japanese army is not invincible. This battle changed the course of the Pacific War, allowing American troops to go on the offensive and begin the liberation of the occupied territories. The Battle of Guadalcanal. The Battle of Guadalcanal, which took place from August 1940 to February 1943, was the first major ground operation by American forces against Japan. Guadalcanal, located in the Solomon Islands, was strategically important for controlling the Pacific Ocean and ensuring safe shipping lanes. American forces began landing on the island in August 1942, facing fierce resistance from Japanese forces. The Battle of Guadalcanal was not only a military clash, but also a test for the morale of the soldiers. American troops faced difficult conditions, including tropical heat, illness, and shortages of supplies. The battle included both ground and naval operations, and was one of the first examples of the use of aviation in naval battles. In the end, the American forces were able to win, which was an important step towards liberating the Pacific Ocean from Japanese control. Key battles such as Operation Overlord, the Battle of Midway, and the Battle of Guadalcanal became important moments during World War I. They not only demonstrated the tactical skills of the American troops, but also became symbols of determination and unity in the fight against aggression. These battles changed the course of the war and became the basis for future Allied victories. Boring history for sleep. The formation of a new world order after the war, the United States emerged as a superpower, playing a leading role in shaping the post-war world. In 1945, the United Nations was founded, whose main goal was to prevent future conflicts and maintain peace. The United States became one of the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council, which gave them significant influence in the international arena. Also in the post-war period, the Marshall Plan program was launched, aimed at restoring the destroyed economy of Europe. This program has not only helped restore the economies of the countries affected by the war, but also strengthened the position of the United States as a leader in world politics and economics. Conclusion: the Second World War was a turning point in the history of the United States, changing not only domestic politics, but also international relations. The country emerged from the war with a new status as a world power, ready to assume responsibility for maintaining international peace and security. This conflict, although it brought a lot of suffering, became a catalyst for significant changes that determined the further development of humanity. Boring history for sleep. The Cold War 1947-1991. The Cold War is a period in history that spans more than 4 decades and is characterized by the political, military and ideological confrontation between the United States of America and the Soviet Union. This conflict, which began shortly after the end of World War I, covers many aspects, including the arms race, the space race, the ideological struggle, and the impact on international relations. Let us take a closer look at the key events and aspects of this important period. 1. The origins of the Cold War. After the end of World War I, the world found itself divided into 2 camps, a capitalist one, led by the United States, and a socialist one, led by the Soviet Union. Both states, which had previously been allies in the fight against Nazi Germany, now became competitors seeking to assert their ideologies and expand their influence in the international arena. The main reasons that contributed to the outbreak of the Cold War include ideological differences. Capitalism and socialism were 2 opposing economic and political systems. The United States aspired to a free market and democratic institutions, while the USA promoted the idea of a centralized economy and a one-party system. Geopolitical competition. Both states sought to expand their influence in the international arena. This was reflected in the creation of military alliances such as NATO, the North Atlantic Alliance, and the Warsaw Pact. Nuclear weapons. After the end of World War I, both countries began to develop their nuclear arsenals, which added tension to their relations. Nuclear weapons have become an important element of the deterrent strategy. Two, the arms race. One of the key aspects of the Cold War was the arms race, during which both sides sought to create and accumulate nuclear weapons and other types of weapons. Nuclear weapon. In 1945, the United States was the first to test an atomic bomb, which gave them a significant advantage. However, in 1949, the Soviet Union successfully tested its atomic bomb, which marked the beginning of a nuclear arms race. Thermonuclear weapons. In the early 1950s, both sides began developing thermonuclear weapons, which had a destructive power significantly exceeding that of atomic weapons. This created a new wave of tension as the fear of a possible nuclear conflict began to dominate international relations. Deterrence strategy. The United States has developed a deterrence strategy aimed at preventing the spread of Soviet influence and nuclear weapons. This strategy included the creation of military alliances such as NATO and the deployment of troops in various regions of the world. 3. The space race. The space race became another important aspect of the Cold War, reflecting the technological rivalry between the two superpowers. Sputnik launch. In 1957, the Soviet Union launched the first artificial satellite of the Earth, Sputnik, which was a shocking event for the United States and the world. This success became a symbol of Soviet scientific power and raised concerns about the technological superiority of the USSR. The Apollo program. In response to the successes of the Soviet Union, the United States launched the Apollo program, which aimed to land a man on the moon. In 1969, astronauts Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin became the first people to set foot on the lunar surface, which was an important victory for the United States in the space race. Space research and cooperation. Despite the rivalry, cooperation in the field of space research began in the last years of the Cold War. The Soyuz and Apollo programs led to joint missions, which became a symbol of possible cooperation between the two powers. 4. The ideological struggle. The Cold War was also a time of intense ideological struggle. Both sides sought to promote their ideologies and strengthen their positions in the international arena. Propaganda. The United States and the Soviet Union used propaganda to shape public opinion both inside and outside their countries. Both sides sought to present their system as a better and more efficient one. Conflicts around the world. The Cold War led to many conflicts in various regions of the world, including the Korean War 1950-1953, the Vietnam War 1955-1975, and the wars in Africa and Latin America. These conflicts were often driven by a struggle for influence between the two superpowers. Decolonization. The Cold War period coincided with the process of decolonization in Africa and Asia. Newly independent states often found themselves under pressure from both the United States and the USSR, which sought to win them over. Five. Key events of the Cold War. The Cold War was full of many significant events that had an impact on international relations and domestic politics. Cuban Missile. In 1962, the world was on the brink of nuclear war when the United States discovered Soviet missiles in Cuba. This event was the culmination of tension between the two powers and led to the realization of the need for dialogue and arms control. Detente. In the 1970s, a period of détente began, when both sides sought to reduce tensions and find ways to cooperate. This led to the signing of a number of arms control agreements, such as the Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty SALT I and 1972. Return to confrontation in the late 1970s and early 1980s. The Cold War escalated again. President Reagan's New Deal policy included increased military spending and a tough stance on the Soviet Union, which led to a new arms race. 6. The end of the Cold War. By the end of the 1980s, the Cold War was coming to an end. The key factors that led to this were perestroika and glasnost. Mikhail Gorbachev's policy of reforming the Soviet economy and society created the conditions for reducing tensions. The program of perestroika and glasnost opened the door to discussion and reform, which contributed to the weakening of the control of the KPSU. Reducing nuclear tension. In 1987, the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty was signed, which became an important step towards disarmament and reducing the nuclear threat. The fall of the Berlin Wall. In 1989, the fall of the Berlin Wall became a symbol of the end of the Cold War. This event marked not only the end of the division of Germany, but also the beginning of the collapse of Soviet influence in Eastern Europe. The collapse of the Soviet Union. In 1991, the Soviet Union officially collapsed, marking the end of the Cold War. The newly independent states that emerged in place of the USA became part of the New World politics. Conclusion. The Cold War left a deep mark on the history of the 20th century and had a significant impact on international relations, domestic politics, and public consciousness. The conflict between the United States and the Soviet Union has become a symbol of the confrontation between two ideologies and systems, and its consequences are still being felt. Understanding the Cold War helps to understand not only historical processes, but also modern geopolitical realities. Boring history for sleep. The modern era. 2000 present time. The modern era in the history of the United States begins with the beginning of the new millennium and covers many significant events that have influenced the domestic and foreign policy of the country. One of the most tragic and defining moments of this period was the terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001, which radically changed the course of history. 1. The terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001. On September 11, 2001, the world witnessed one of the most devastating terrorist attacks in history. A group of terrorists linked to the Al-Qaeda organization hijacked four passenger planes, two of which were aimed at the World Trade Center in New York, and the third at the Pentagon in Washington. The fourth plane, United Airlines Flight 93, crashed in Pennsylvania when passengers tried to regain control of the plane. The number of victims, almost 30 people died as a result of the attacks, which became one of the most tragic pages in the history of the United States. These events shocked the nation and caused a global reaction. Government reaction. After the attacks, President George W. Bush declared a war on terrorism. This led to significant changes in domestic and foreign policy, including the adoption of the Law on Patriotism, which expanded the government's powers in the fight against terrorism. 2. The war in Afghanistan. One of the first steps in the war on terrorism was the U.S. invasion of Afghanistan in October 2001. The purpose of the operation was to overthrow the Taliban regime, which provided shelter for Al-Qaeda terrorists. Operation Enduring Freedom. This operation began with large-scale air attacks on Taliban and Al-Qaeda positions. As a result, by the end of 2001, the Taliban was overthrown and a new interim Afghan administration was established. Long-term consequences. However, the war in Afghanistan dragged on for many years, and the United States found itself embroiled in a complex conflict that included not only military operations, but also efforts to rebuild the country. Problems with corruption, lack of security, and lack of a stable government continued to affect the situation in the region. The Iraq War in 2003. The United States launched an invasion of Iraq based on allegations of Iraq's possession of weapons of mass destruction and links to terrorist groups. Operation Freedom of Iraq. In March 2003, an operation began that quickly led to the overthrow of Saddam Hussein's regime. However, after the fall of the government, serious security problems arose, leading to civil war and increased violence. The absence of wind, it later turned out that the claims of weapons of mass destruction in Iraq were false, which led to criticism of the Bush administration's policies and led to public protests. 4. Influence on domestic policy. The September 11 attacks and subsequent wars had a significant impact on US domestic politics. Security and rights of citizens. The adoption of the law on patriotism has raised concerns about violations of civil rights and freedoms. Many Americans are concerned about increased surveillance and restrictions on personal freedoms. The polarization of society. The wars in Afghanistan and Iraq have become a matter of deep disagreement in society. Discussions about the expediency of military action and the consequences for the American people have become an important part of the political debate. 5. Economic consequences. The modern era has also been marked by significant economic developments. Financial crisis of 2008. The U.S. economy faced serious problems related to the mortgage crisis and the collapse of financial institutions. This led to a recession, mass unemployment, and significant changes in economic policy. The government's response. In response to the crisis, the Obama administration has taken a number of measures, including economic incentives and financial sector reforms. 6. Obama and policy changes. In 2008, Barack Obama became the first African-American president of the United States. His presidency has become a symbol of hope for change and progress. Healthcare. One of Obama's key achievements was the passage of the Affordable Care Act, which expanded access to health services for millions of Americans. Foreign policy. Obama also sought to change the U.S. approach to foreign policy by focusing on diplomacy and multilateral cooperation. This included improving relations with Cuba and signing a nuclear deal with Iran. 7. Political and social movements. The modern era has also become a time of significant social and political movements. The Black Lives Matter movement. In response to police violence against African Americans, the Black Lives Matter movement has become an important part of public discourse, raising issues of racial justice and human rights. 2016 elections. The 2016 presidential election has become one of the most polarized events in modern politics. The election of Donald Trump has provoked a wide range of reactions and protests, reflecting deep divisions in society. 8. The COVID-19 pandemic. In 2020, the world faced the COVID-19 pandemic, which had a significant impact on the lives of Americans and the country's economy. Health and safety. The pandemic has led to strict travel restrictions, business closures, and significant changes in daily life. Economic consequences. The U.S. economy has experienced a sharp decline, leading to massive unemployment and the need for economic support measures. The modern era in the history of the United States is a time of significant changes caused by both internal and external factors. The September 11 terrorist attacks, the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, economic crises, social movements, and the COVID-19 pandemic have all had a profound impact on the country, society, and politics. It is important to understand these events and their consequences in order to understand how they shape the modern world and the future of the United States. Boring history for sleep. Economic crisis of 2008. Global financial crisis. The 2008 economic crisis was one of the most serious financial shocks in history, having a significant impact on the economy of the United States and the world. This crisis not only led to a recession, but also caused profound changes in financial regulation, the social climate, and political sentiment. 1. Causes of the crisis. The crisis of 2008 was caused by a combination of factors that had been accumulating for several years. Mortgage bubble. In the early 2000s, there was a boom in the U.S. housing market. Low interest rates and affordable loans have contributed to rising property prices. Many banks began to issue mortgage loans even to those borrowers who did not have a stable income or a good credit history. Securitization. Financial institutions began to combine mortgage loans into securities, which were then sold to investors. This created the illusion of security as the risks were distributed among many market participants. However, in reality, this only increased the systemic risks. Lack of proper regulation, vague rules, and lack of oversight by financial regulators have contributed to increased speculation and reckless behavior in the market. 2. The development of the crisis. The crisis began to develop in 2007 when real estate prices began to fall. This has led to an increase in mortgage defaults, especially among low-income borrowers, so-called subprime loans. Banking problems. In 2008, the situation reached a critical point when large financial institutions such as Lehman Brothers declared bankruptcy. This caused panic sales in the financial markets and a loss of confidence in financial institutions. Global reaction. The crisis quickly spread beyond the United States, affecting the financial systems of other countries. Global markets collapsed and many countries faced recession.